We are now at the third and the final component of the topic, concerns of organizing engineering business and systems, and I am going to talk to you about the managerial issues in telecom engineering business. One of the driving characteristics of telecom engineering business is, of course, mergers and acquisitions. The need for merger and acquisition is large, and therefore, you will find that the situation is continuously in a state of flux. Be it SMEs or be it medium sized companies or large firms, they all create special competitive dynamics and generate size specific skills. I would like to draw your attention to this phrase, size specific skills. There is a mistaken notion in certain circles that movement from large to medium and medium to small is really a factor of downscaling the size specific skills. It is not true. Large firms, medium sized firms, small firms, they all require different versions of skill domains. The kind of marketing which is needed in the SME is not the same as the kind of marketing which is needed in the large scale organization, for the simple reason that the large scale can afford a significant investment in advertisement, the small scale cannot. Large scale firms can have super specializations, where you have a person who just takes care of recruitment and selection in the HR area. A small firm will not be able to have a person just dedicated to recruitment. He will have to do many other things besides, and therefore, there is definite need for multi-skilling, and many examples can be given. But the important thing to register here is that there are size specific skills required, just as there are technology and service requirements. The kind of technology which one mobile uses may not be the same as the kind of technology another mobile uses, and this is not the best place to get into the nuances of GSM technologies and their parallel technologies and whatever else. But take it from me, technology and service requirements can vary. These firms intend to complete these requirements through mergers and acquisitions. Therefore, by definition, in the telecom sector of engineering business, the principle of merger and acquisition is little more practiced than very many other places. The issue of technology in telecom has several levels. In the emerging order, technology is the clinching factor in competitiveness in telecom sector, and indeed will be the bottom line for survival. In telecom, no entrepreneurship venture will make sense without looking into the architecture of technology, the maintenance of technology, and the diffusion of technology and its adaptations. I would like to draw your attention specifically to these three dimensions, because they are very often overlooked, and it is not realized that the architecture of technology very often determines the competitive behavior of the firm. Therefore, the choice of the technology and the kind of architecture it has is important. The maintenance of technology is not such a remote factor, but diffusion of technology and its adaptation takes people a little while of time to understand. The technology issues in engineering business, as noted earlier, has to do with the kind of investment climate and investment required. Therefore, you really need an investment specialist who understands technology, who has a proper understanding of the business environment around the firm, who alone can advise you into the investments required. Now, this is not a straightforward finance manager's job. Finance is an important and a significant area of management. However, there are shades and shades of financial operations, and it is important to register that investment in telecom requires continuous monitoring and the ability to accelerate or decelerate. The life period and cycle of technology itself is variable, and no investment decision can possibly be taken with a level of confidence without having understood the life period and the cycle of technology. The financial gains which come from this kind of investment will have to be seen in technological terms, and the kind of redeployment of financial gains in the newer form of technology for further financial gains is a self-feeding cycle. If the story concluded there, it would be a relief, but it does not. There is a cyclical character between investment and the architecture of technology. There is the upscalability factor which affects investment, but then just as important is the backward and the forward linkage of the technology. We have recognized the sub-segmentation of telecom and the compatibility and integration of everything from switching to field engineering becomes very important in the understanding of technological growth in engineering business, which touches telecom. Therefore, I would like to draw your attention to the backward and forward linkages of technology. Then of course, there are economies of scale. The economies of scale are very often determined by the regulatory policies of the governance process. The regulatory policies often are taken in an informed manner, but sometimes when they are not taken in an informed manner, they can cause havoc to the growth of the industry, because A, the technology is not understood, B, the implications of the kind of economies of scale which are attributed to that kind of technology is not always clear to the players. Therefore, there is a trip up. And perhaps most significantly, the pricing and the costing of that technology does not have antecedents to create patterns which can be drawn upon, and the spectrum issue and all the furor which it caused is merely one example of what can happen in telecom engineering business. The factors which affect growth of the sector and the engineering business therein have of course a global element, but let me draw your attention to some of the indigenous efforts in technology development, which is important to understand how there is a mix and coexistence of say at times contradictory concerns. Technology development in telecom engineering business does inevitably require an indigenous effort, because acquisition of any technology can take place in the following ways. technology import related to foreign investment, technology import by the Indian industry, indigenous R&D effort, contemporary technology not purchasable. Now, if you look at these 4 discrete concerns, then you will be able to figure out how indigenous effort in technology development is central to the growth of telecom engineering business. I have made some effort to highlight it, because generally people are wise about it, but often there is an effort to be glib and adopt a reductionist approach. If you adopt a reductionist approach, then you have a problem at hand. The problem is you may start believing in truisms like you do not rediscover a wheel. Now, the slogan owes its success as much to its being a half truth as the fact that it is so simple to peddle. The fact is, no 2 wheels are of the same size, and when it comes to technology, no 2 wheels are made out of the same material. And when you start talking of size and material and maintenance, the indigenous dimensions clearly starts affecting the technological component. Therefore, even while talking of telecom engineering business as an illustration of how engineering business principles operate, I find it necessary to draw your attention to what I have labeled here indigenous factors in technology development. That helps us to take an easy step towards R&D in telecom engineering business, because you cannot have indigenous efforts in technology development without R&D in telecom engineering business. So, by definition, there are areas of engineering business where R&D is an integral part of the entire socio-technical process or the business of engineering being put to productive use. In India, the telecom sector is now almost dominated by the private sector. This transfer has eroded the R&D base in the country. There are a lot of views on public sector, there are a lot of emotions which are generated on the public sector, but many of its strength need repetition and need underscoring. If you look at the nature of the operation of the public sector, you will find that almost to the man, the qualifications of recruitment in the public sector are far more stringently operated. This is not a value judgment, this is a statement of facts. But then something happens and the business dimension of public sector does not flourish as prominently in certain cases as the business dimension of the private sector. Now, this is not a debate I want to open up here. What I wish you to realize is that so far as telecom engineering business is concerned, at least in India, the R&D base was much larger when the public sector was in dominance than it is today. ITI had a significant wing of R&D attached to it, which almost grew parallelly to the actual production operations. There was a technology operation, and it is there in some incarnation even today in the Khurshid Lal Bhavan setup in Delhi. What one finds, however, is that with the coming in of a large number of foreign players, the R&D base in that sector has tended to recede. The example of this is visible how institutions like CDOT have now faded into oblivion. I would like to believe it is not true, because there is an attempt to revive CDOT, and my own feeling is that CDOT is bound to have better days progressively, because the need to have an R&D base in the country is only bound to grow. The recent havoc in the Uttarakhand with reference to the kind of disruption which has taken place because of deluge, because of landslides, have showed the utmost urgency to have indigenous R&D in telecommunications to meet the communication needs of such disastrous situations. And there is no guarantee that the Uttarakhand experience will not be repeated in other areas, may be triggered off by different factors. So, the need to have an indigenous R&D in telecom is, at least to my way of thinking, axiomatic, but that somehow recedes into a background in the kind of drumming up which a lot of non-Indian agencies are able to do, and we need to create a balance around it. Hardware miniaturization and the use of optics in large volume products offers opportunities for R&D. And again, CDOT is quickly growing into this area. WiMAX can provide broadband wireless access at high data rates within a non-line of sight ranges of 15 kilometers in rural areas and 700 meters in urban areas. This meets Indian situations. It is 30 times faster than the much touted 3G and will solve the problems of last mile connectivity. So, one has to look at R&D in the telecom engineering business as an integral part of the growth of the sector, but then the significance that R&D has may not be so assertive or inherent as in some of the other sectors. But then this is not the place to get into an understanding or a discussion of the intra-sectoral profiles of R&D. I brought the point up merely to illustrate to you the nature of engineering business, the concerns of engineering business, and how indigenous R&D is such an integral part of the growth of that kind of engineering business. And like in many things, India has had a rich past, and so far as telecom is concerned, an organization like CDOT is very much needed and should be able to go from strength to strength. However, I would not like to convey the impression that R&D in multinational companies or non-Indian companies is low. It is not low. It may not be rooted in India, but they do their own R&D, and you should be aware of that. Nokia and France Telecom R&D are cooperating on the evaluation of France Telecom strategy and schedule for migration to IPv6, the next generation IP protocol. Nokia has said that it will create a new CDMA R&D facility in Navi Mumbai, India. Now, I find it necessary to underscore this, because R&D itself acquires a certain profile and a certain character in engineering business. And the larger point to be made is, there are indigenous capabilities to be developed, there are exogenous capabilities which will continue growing, there will be technology transfer, but R&D competencies indigenous to a country must continue to be reinforced and must continue to grow. Alcatel typically tied up with CDOT in 2005 for R&D in WiMAX. It is now testing the rollout of the technology. So, it is not an either or relationship, it can be a mix too. However, the actual amount of benefits in terms of technology transfer and technology sharing will accrue from R&D investments by foreign companies, and that is yet to be seen, as they seem to be interested by and large in their own commercial purposes, which can't be grudged, but then just as that can't be grudged, a view from the Indian perspective on these issues also cannot be grudged. While India has enthusiastically embraced the telecom revolution in the past decade, it seems now to be lagging behind in the race for innovation, and this is a gap which government is aware, is planning to do something about it. Something has been done, but the whole process needs to be speeded up in a manner which creates an innovation culture in R&D so far as engineering business is concerned. Now, that brings us to the study of patents and intellectual property rights in telecom. This is closely similar to the fate of R&D in India. It has a potential to reduce transaction costs, and the more we focus on it, the better it is. Well managed patents often result in windfall gains, especially during merger and acquisition. However, the number of patents being filed don't seem to be large, or at least not as large as the requirement is. Therefore, there is a need for concepts like patent pool, which is an agreement between two or more patent holders to cross license patents and other IPR related to a particular technology. A look at the patent pool concept may be useful. In US, a patent pool was formed in 1997 with respect to the MPEG-2 standards. The standard defines how to represent a digital video data stream used in digital cable television system, digital satellite for television and DVD players. If a company wants to sell equipment that is capable of decoding a digital video stream on a DVD, it must make its product compliant with the MPEG-2 standard. Hence, patent pools provide a better comfort zone to license and help to keep the transaction costs low even after payment of royalties. As a strategic thrust, this needs to be encouraged. Once patent pool grows in number, it would also become easy for licensing of early stage investment and technologies. What is being recommended therefore is a policy perspective on telecom, which puts all this together in a manner which makes technological growth and operations not only easier, but more consistent with the nationally cherished dreams of covering all remote areas in a communication network, using communication networks as an instrument of equity and distributive prosperity, and adding value to the business as it grows. Patent pool would figure prominently in such a scheme of things. The statutory requirements of the FDI cap in telecom sector was at one stage set to be 74%. At another stage, there has been talk of reducing this cap, and this debate will go on. For our purposes, however, if any new player wanting to enter into telecom market has to be considered, it has to come through JVs, partnerships or mergers and acquisition, and this, according to some people, needs rethought. Classic example is the recent Videophone acquisition of Hutchinson's 67% stake in Hutch SR for $11.1 billion, and I do not think we have heard last of this resonating acquisition, but that is a debate which I would not like to get into here, but shows how at a national policy level mergers and acquisitions need to be handled with high degree of appreciation of the business concerns. Of course, the attempt should be in all efforts to gain market credibility. A number of times companies scout for a local partner through a JV or a subsidiary to enter a new territory or country. If the indigenous partner does not have a matching market profile and a matching understanding of how it works, then one can have a problem at hand. And above all, one needs to have matching managerial styles. If all this is not thought through during mergers and acquisitions, then there is a huge opportunity loss, and there are jerks and jolts which can affect the profitability of the joint venture. This is in line with the company's philosophy of think global and act local. Ultimately, it helps the company gain valuable market insights and market experience. Take the case of now non-existent collaboration between Hero and Honda so far as the two-wheelers were concerned. The technology came from Honda, the marketing done was by the Hero group, and together it seemed to be a win-win situation. But for reasons which may not necessarily be relevant here for a discussion, it was obvious that both the parties agreed that it was best to part ways, and Heroes decided to have a separate technology and Honda decided to have its own marketing in India. So, both of them decided to get into the respective areas which earlier on had been put aside for the partner. The proposition is mergers and acquisitions have their own logic, and they cannot be made slogans, because slogans do not necessarily lend themselves to managerial solutions. This will be a major factor in analysis of risk framework and taking fresh investment decisions. Gaining price advantage is an important managerial principle in management of engineering business Not that it is not an argument in other kind of businesses, but in engineering business it is particularly significant. This is so because India is a price sensitive market. It is very essential for telecom companies to be able to provide this service and products at a current market prevalent price, and that is the catch. As we look at the scene today, the receding pricing principles of telecom services have started affecting the bottom line of running telecom operations. And yet, it is inherent in the situation, not only because of the price sensitivity of the market, but also because the nature of technological growth. Hence, foreign companies may find it difficult to meet the pricing pressures on them, and which way the direction will grow, so far as in telecom engineering business is concerned, only time will tell. The larger principle to which I seek to draw your attention is to underscore that engineering business has a character of its own, which responds to many non-engineering factors, and that has to be understood in a managerial frame. Hence, through mergers and acquisitions, they can leverage either local lower cost technology or take advantage of lower manpower service costs, or they can forego one for the other. There are any number of permutations and combinations possible, and so long as you are willing to look at the permutations and combinations, it seems something simple to understand and easy to comprehend, though complicated to operate. In this context, a reference to the role of government again is important. Many statements of significant political executives have outlined the need for greater FDI. Some will recall the much quoted statement of the Prime Minister that money does not grow on trees and therefore, FDI is essential, or the views of the Finance Minister on foreign direct investment. But there are externalities needed for stable long term investment to come in. And even if it does, to say that FDI will be able to solve all investment issues would be only a statement of the naive. Therefore, it is essential to try one's best to reduce hot money through P notes. Foreign investment in stock markets will also therefore become a factor. The policy fine tuning where promissory notes are concerned, or where the investments in stock markets is concerned, is really a large issue, and we may not find it useful to get into that level of debate or discussion here. But it is important to remind ourselves that merger and acquisition itself requires strong governmental support to be able to survive, and synergistically one has to create long term value for the ordinary shareholder for merger and acquisition to survive. Merger and acquisitions are also expected to unlock value in the business in the long term, though in the short term they may put immense pressure on the bottom line. Hence, one more concern which has to be flagged The holding capacity of the firm will be a factor of the holding capacity of the business, will be a factor of the appreciation which the ordinary shareholder or the not so ordinary shareholder has about the business environment and its stability in India. Now, all these are concerns of engineering business, and where it is important for an engineer to get a feel of what engineering business is all about in its managerial dimension. If one expands one's focus of concern to international telecom engineering business, then there are certain considerations which again need to be considered very closely. There is the potential subscriber base. One needs to have access to export markets. The government incentives play a role. Favorable cost structure becomes a variable. The nature of infrastructure and its sustainability is critical. Macroeconomic climate becomes a factor which has an interplay with enterprise growth. Educated workforce and management talent becomes much in demand, and the role of law and regulatory environment becomes critical. You find presented on the screen 8 dimensions of international telecom engineering business, which has to do with human factors in engineering, which has to do with users, which has to do with access to markets, and which has to do with the financial policies of the government. In fact, it is one of the most pervasive policy platforms which has a financial dimension, a marketing dimension, a consumer direction, is a superstructure based on a kind of infrastructure, and has an interplay with the macroeconomic climate. It is not possible to assign weightages to all this in a dynamic situation. Be that as it may, it is essential to understand how this becomes significant or how this becomes a factor in carving out a business space for engineering. I suggest you take a careful look at the following phases of a project life cycle to understand how project management, process implementation can be a possible route to integrating these dimensions. There is conceptualization, there is planning, there is organization, there is implementation, there is control, there is integration, there is delivery, there is acceptance, and generally in a scholastic mode 8 project life cycle phases are recognized. The responsibility of the headquarters on global basis is therefore, together with the responsibility of the local company to run this system. The red arrows show to you the responsibility of the headquarters on a global basis, and the blue arrow shows to you the responsibility of the local company or the country in which the operation actually takes place. Hence, there is a scope for joint ventures between international companies and local companies, which are not mutually exclusive, but then the key question remains what works where and what is needed in which segment of telecom engineering business. I would like to conclude this discussion with a brief reference to entrepreneurship in telecom engineering business, because ultimately innovation or creativity or its manifestations do acquire an entrepreneurial character. And if you look at entrepreneurial character as an approach to handling engineering business, then the picture like the following emerges. There is the pre-launch stage, where you look out for new subscribers. In the case of telecom engineering business, it comes in the form of telecom markets. Telecom markets will have their own size and growth, and telecom users will have their own segments and requirements. Then one has to watch out for other operators and manufacturers. One has to do a gap analysis. For example, VAS or technology. One has to get adept to tackling government and regulations, the monetary aspects, and indeed where need be red tape. There is need for a revenue and a cost analysis. In the post-launch stage, there is a value chain. This value chain requires sourcing of infrastructure and content, implementation of infrastructure and content, a look at operations, telecom service delivery. Let me walk you through this value chain quickly again, just in case you have lost me on the first narration. Sourcing of infrastructure and content, implementation of infrastructure and content, operations, telecom service delivery. Then two things have to be handled: telecom service operating model and brand management and advertising. So far as telecom service operating model is concerned, one will have to look at people and policing in terms of watching what is happening to the regulatory framework. So far as brand management and advertising is concerned, positioning of the telecom brand as subscriber alluring and churning will have to be factored in, and what people are beginning to discover is very often advertising can become a nuisance on the telecom instruments, and that is another story which can perhaps be taken up on another day. Four strategy elements therefore can be summed up in the following manner. There is innovativeness, there is competitiveness, there is localization, and there is globalization. So, if you look at y axis being broken up into innovations and competitiveness, and x axis between the local and the global, we have the cluster insider, we have protected markets as options available on localization as an element of competitiveness and innovativeness. It can then move on to transnational innovation if globalization is put together with innovativeness, but if globalization is put together with competitiveness, it can result in global efficiency. The upper left hand corner of the diagram which I just showed you puts emphasis on the innovativeness emanating from lead cluster, and I will show to you the diagram so that you know how to correlate my remarks with that. So, as I was saying, the upper left hand corner puts emphasis on innovativeness emanating from a lead cluster. The upper right hand corner focuses on innovativeness as a global process, often referred to a transnational solution combining resources and capabilities in several locations. The upper right hand corner. The lower left hand corner covers strategies of cost efficiency with emphasis on home market, often true for MNCs and large home markets. So, back again to the diagram to understand the lower left hand corner strategies. And we go on to the lower right hand corner global efficiency, that is the global cost leadership.